they're projected to jump back to 13th right now. They went 6-7 last year. Part of the reason for that is they weren't bad last year. They went like 0-5 or 0-4 in one score finishes. Their offense was great.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Bill Connelly of ESPN on the show. He is a college football analytics expert. Among other topics, we talk about his SP Plus model and the changes that he had to make this year to account for the transfer portal. We talk about the Heisman Trophy and the things that you should look for in making a good bet. And we also talk about teams like Penn State, Colorado, USC, Michigan, Ohio State, and others. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Every Saturday, I send out my curated list of sports betting tips and analytics in 5 Nugget Saturday. In addition, over the next month, you'll get my 10-part preview series. To check it out, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Bill Connelly, a man that really needs no introduction, but I will mention that he does some excellent writing for ESPN, and he is an analytics expert, and one of the things that he is most well known for is the SP Plus college football rankings and ratings. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, as always.
Absolutely, Bill. Always love our yearly chat that you are gracious enough to schedule in early August so that we can talk about the college football season. And honestly, so many other things this time, but let's start with college football.
I'm all actually talking about real football. That sounds like an absolute blast.
Exactly.
We've gotten sucked into talking about future seasons and, market or media rights and market sizes and all that stuff again. And that's dragged me down. So let's talk football.
Yeah, let's talk about real football because all that stuff doesn't quite matter yet. Bill, so you have created the SP Plus system. Give us a sense for, what kind of data and metrics go into that, and in particular, what goes into the preseason model.
Yeah, I mean, the preseason model is, privy to my constant tinkering. But that's kind of like that went from, I'm always tinkering no matter what. But the last couple of years, obviously, we've had to completely rethink everything really about how preseason projections should work, since the entire premise of roster building in college football has changed over the last 2 years. But really, yeah. So first of all, SP Plus is designed to be a tempo adjusted and opponent adjusted measure of like the sustainable parts of the game of football. So, big plays and turnovers, they're pretty relatively random, but they also have a humongous impact on the actual game. But by focusing on things like efficiency, like my success rate measure, all those kinds of things are a little more sustainable, a little more stable over time. And so that kind of bleeds into the SP Plus ratings, a pretty healthy amount, overall. That's kind of the general approach, though, is sustainability. Like what's real in a game with a pointy ball and, a bunch of 18 to 22 year old guys who are the least stable members of the population. So that was the intent, and it's taken on many iterations, but the preseason projections are like, it's always been based around kind of 3 pillars: the returning production side of things, like what of last year's team do you return? Recruiting to a certain degree, like what of the players you don't return, what's the caliber of the athlete replacing them, basically. And then, of course, a pretty significant look at recent history, because, especially with college football, your history is a pretty good predictor of what you're going to be capable of moving forward. So recent performances weighted. So last year's is heavier than the year before, which is heavier than the year before, all that. But that's the general idea: is returning production, recruiting, and recent history.
Perfect. Are there tweaks this year for transfer portal stuff?
Spectacular tweaks this year. No, I mean that was the whole heading into last year. I had a pretty good projections did well from year to year, and a lot of that was based on this idea of returning production. Return obviously, if you return everybody from last year, it doesn't matter if your team stunk. We always try to, when I tweet something out, people always try to correlate heavy returning production to being really good, but it's really about a correlation between improvement and regression more than being good or bad. But if you return most of last year's team, you are most likely going to improve off of last year's production, whatever last year's results, whatever those results actually were. But in previous years, if you had 6 transfers in a year, that was a massive load of transfers, and I could kind of get away with just simply taking the transfers you brought in, just taking their production from the previous school, kind of cramming it into the numerator and the denominator of the the returning production formula, basically, and that would work pretty well.
Okay.
Right. Just generally speaking, that would work pretty well when you had 2 to 3 guys, or maybe 4 or 5. And of course, then last year, not only did USC bring in like 20, but it was an important 20 guys that included the future Heisman winner and the reigning Biletnikoff winner. And a
lot of scrubs on, what we learned to be scrubs on defense too,
right,
which I want to get back to. So it wasn't all roses for USC.
Right. But the offense obviously was spectacularly transformed. And we knew it would be. It's just like the approach. I didn't want to go crazy with new experimenting with the overall formula. So I didn't really do a whole heck of a lot different. And we headed into the season basically knowing that my USC projection, probably my LSU projection, because they also signed a ton, it was just going to be wrong, and they were going to be pretty unprojectable. And then we were going to figure out, once there was a year, at least a year of data in this kind of new transfer heavy era, like I'd be able to kind of step back and look at the impact that transfers have, and the recruiting rankings of transfers, how that should be incorporated. How you incorporate that into returning production and the overall projection. So, of course, now we've moved the goalpost again. I think the way I've gone about things for 2023, I think will work really well for the teams that are signing 15 to 20 transfers and being able to account for the caliber of those transfers, all that stuff. And then Colorado goes out and signs 50 transfers.
Unbelievable.
And so they're projected, currently, like 103 is what they were in my May projections. And there's really, I'll have updated projections here in another week or week and a half, but that's not going to change very much. That's just where they are, even incorporating those 50 transfers. Number one, they were so horrifically bad last year that they are one of the most likely to improve teams. They're projected to improve by almost 11 points per game, which is almost unheard of with these projections. And that only gets them to 103 because they were so terrible last season. So they're the new unprojectable, but I'm at least kind of, I never try to do anything too rash until there's at least a little bit of data to kind of read the situation. And the situation keeps changing. So whatever.
Awesome. I really do want to get back to Colorado because they're fascinating. But first, so from what you said, are you just kind of using that formula that you were talking about where you mess with the numerator and denominator returning production? Is that kind of a general formula for 131 teams?
That's the general formula, yeah. So basically, like if if you get a new quarterback in, you are returning his production, even though it wasn't your production last year. But that has worked overall, and I think it's still kind of the way to go. I mentioned numerator and denominator. I've been wanting to kind of to look into, like, what if we don't put it in the denominator, and suddenly you can return 113% of last year's passing yards or whatever, and does that make an impact? I haven't gone down that road.
Sure.
Because I'm not completely sure it'll bear fruit any differently, but yeah, that's been the general idea.
Okay, but I guess my question was, like, there's a formula. It's not like you're going through all of 133 teams and saying, right.
I'd like to think there's a little bit of an art to this, but there's not that much of an art to this. No.
Got it. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is, we talked about returning production. Do you think, so USC was just awful on defense last year, but they return 14 of 19 defenders with 200 plus snaps, which I've been joking, maybe isn't a good thing, right? Do you I presume you don't consider things like that. Well, do you think that's true? And how would that kind of impact where you think your numbers are on a team like a USC defense?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's basically what I was saying. Like the fact that they return, I think it's currently like 70%, 76% of last year's defensive production. That doesn't mean they'll be good, but it basically projects out to be like a 2-point change, 2-point improvement on defense, which if you had a good defense, that makes you a very good defense. But if you had a horrible defense, that makes it, just a slightly less horrible defense. It doesn't necessarily mean some massive change. I mean, with USC, I am very curious about. You could tell heading into last year, you had Caleb Williams, you had Jordan Addison on offense in terms of there were some marquee transfers, but then on defense it was backups and guys who didn't really produce any sort of major disruption at their previous school. Like everybody was talking themselves into Eric Gentry, the linebacker. He had like 6 tackles for loss or something like that as a freshman at Arizona. Like he was not, or Arizona State, I'm sorry. Like he wasn't some sort of massive star that they were bringing in, but he was the most proven of the bunch. And so everybody was talking themselves into him being a big deal. This year, however, Mason Cobb from Oklahoma State is a fantastic linebacker and a major run disruptor. He had 26 run stops last year, stops at or behind the line. Or he took part in 26, I should say. Kyan Barrs, the defensive tackle from Arizona, he was on 12 run stops, 6 tackles for loss overall. Like they actually signed disruptive guys this year. Bear Alexander at Georgia, obviously being the big headliner. He was a major recruit. It's hard to crack the Georgia tackle rotation, but in 163 snaps, he still had 4 tackles for loss. He had 2 sacks. He had a run stop in there. He batted down 2 passes. His profile suggests that if you quadruple his snaps, like they probably will this year, he's going to have a spectacular season. So I'm actually pretty optimistic. I mean, I'm not top 40 defense at best because the bar is very low here, but I am pretty optimistic with the actual guys they brought in this year that we will see solid improvement. I had no hope for last year's team. I mean, what we've seen from Alex Grinch, the defensive coordinator there at USC, he followed Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma. Basically, he wants to attack. And if he has basically 3 pass rushers, 3 very, very high level disruptive guys in the front 7 or 6, I guess, then he can do things. He only had that once at Oklahoma, that 2020 season, but they had a very good defense for the back half of 2020 once one of those disruptors was off suspension. So I think he might actually have the disruptive pieces he needs this year. And if they have a top 40-ish defense, that's all they need. They're going to have one of the 2 best offenses in the country. And then suddenly they become a pretty clear Pac-12 favorite here overall, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, so is Grinch's style kind of like Jim Knowles, the new Ohio State? I guess not new this year, but second year.
I think the mindset's similar. I mean, obviously they go about things pretty differently, but the mindset really is, havoc. Efficiency. Jim Knowles especially is a heavy efficiency guy. The top 10 in success rate, even if it means you get burned a couple of times. And last year we saw outside of the 2 playoff teams they played, Penn State had a little bit of success on Ohio State. I think Maryland did as well, but the defense was fine against everybody else. They finished, in my updated SP Plus ratings that I tweaked over the summer, they ended up 13th in defensive SP Plus. It was just that the 2 teams that could burn them did. And, whatever it was, 8 gains of 45 plus yards in those 2 games. Maybe that was a little extreme. And also, maybe we'll see now that they, second year with Knowles and everything, long story short, Knowles has a much better track record of this than Grinch does.
Sure.
And so I'm pretty optimistic about them. But with Grinch, it was a little different. Like he wants to attack, but they had no efficiency whatsoever last year. It wasn't, it wasn't all or nothing like with Ohio State. It was just nothing. And if they could get their hand on a pass, they seemed a little too good at holding on to potential interceptions. Their turnovers luck was kind of off the charts, and that kind of got them through some of those early games. But as soon as the ball stopped bouncing very heavily in their way, they had nothing to offer on defense. So that's a much bigger fixer project for USC, and Grinch is a much less proven defensive coordinator.
For sure. But the style really interests me because it reminds me also of Don Brown when he was at Michigan, attack. And it also reminds me of soccer teams that continue to high press. It seems like a very high variance strategy. And is that always optimal?
I mean, if you don't have talent levels that everybody else has, you do need to figure out a way to increase variance. You could say that you don't need to take as many risks when you've got that level of talent, because it really does force you to have spectacular talent at very specific areas, like we saw with Don Brown. If he had 2 good pass rushers and 2 good corners, he was set. If he didn't have exactly that recipe, things kind of blew up on him pretty quickly. If you have 3 ace pass rushers, pretty much any defensive coordinator is going to do a good job. That's. You could make a case that you don't need some sort of incredibly aggressive defensive coordinator at a school that can have 5-star talent. But it sure is fun when it works. Like Don Brown, those Michigan defenses, when they were working, were just so entertaining, which of course was good because the offense wasn't. But aesthetically, I certainly approve of very talented teams housing very aggressive coordinators, but it doesn't necessarily make for the best. It might not make for the best choice.
Yeah, for sure. Bill, when you first looked at your preseason rankings this year, did any team surprise you, kind of jump out at you, either high or low?
Well, it's funny. By this point, I've been staring at these numbers for so long that I'm not really sure. It all makes sense to me now. Right. But I do remember, like, when I was setting everything up back in February, initially, I was very curious about Penn State, where they would land in the rankings. They ended up, I think, 8th in the May rankings. They might, with the tweaks I'm adding here, they might end up a smidge higher than that, but they're basically going to be bottom half of the top 10. And it'll be basically like last year to a certain degree, in that, they were clearly better than everybody they played except the 2 playoff teams on their schedule. And they just didn't have enough in that regard. Now they're kind of introducing a little more upside and to use the word of the day, variance, with a sophomore quarterback with a spectacular cannon arm, who might be ready and might not. I'm leaning towards yes, but we'll see. In Drew Aller, like he kind of introduces a brand new set of outcomes for Penn State overall. That might not be good outcomes, but could be. And like, if he kind of clicks with a relatively new receiving core, the defense should be top 5 or 10. And you're looking at a really, really solid team. It's just, not only does Aller kind of have to match Sean Clifford from last year, they have to figure out a way to improve enough to actually compete with the 2 teams they couldn't compete with. And we'll see if they can do that. There's a chance they do. But yeah, that'll be interesting. I think overall, there weren't a ton of surprises. I mean, I have LSU 5th at the moment. That kind of makes sense to me. They're a couple points back of Alabama, who's a couple points back of Michigan and Ohio State, ahead of them, and Georgia, I guess. But I think things played out pretty much as I expected. I had Florida State 10th currently. I know there was kind of, with the way they ended their season, there was like a wave of hype with Florida State. I think it's settled a little bit. I think they're not going to end up 3rd in the preseason poll or anything. I was a little worried about that a few months ago. I think they'll land probably a hair ahead of where SP Plus has them, but they're going to be in that 8 to 12 range most likely. So that makes sense for them. And otherwise, I think things make sense. I guess if there was a surprise team, maybe it was Oklahoma. They're projected to jump back to 13th right now. They went 6-7 last year. Part of the reason for that is they weren't bad last year. They went like 0-5 or 0-4 in 1-score finishes. Their offense was great when Dylan Gabriel was healthy, but absolutely horrible when he wasn't in the game. Somehow, none of the backups could even, could move, get a first down at all. So I think they're kind of positioned to make a nice move forward. They only fell to 20th last year. And maybe that was a little bit of a surprise, but yeah, overall, I'd say, I guess I've been doing this long enough that there are never some amazing surprises at the top, at least.
For sure. Let's get back to Penn State a little bit. I think it's interesting how maligned James Franklin gets for consistently having a top 10 program. Obviously, there's, I think one Big East title, Big East.
Big Ten East.
Sorry, Big Ten East. Jeez, can't talk.
B1G East, yes.
Yeah, exactly. At least for, well, whatever. We'll get to that later. I personally think he's a pretty good coach. And there was a while where him and Harbaugh were kind of the bridesmaids in that division and really looking up to Ohio State. I still think James Franklin is a really good coach. And, we have to remember that, 2 years ago, no one wanted Jim Harbaugh in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
I think I was the last one still on that bandwagon. I had it all to myself. And, 2 years, couple of wins over Ohio State, and the entire conversation has changed. And it's not out of the question that James Franklin gets there as well, right? So, I mean, I guess I'm not surprised that they're in the top, the back half of the top 10, right? Because they have been a good program, and it's been that way for like a decade, minus however they started that COVID year or whatnot.
Right. Yeah, I mean they've finished 11th, between 4th and 11th in SP Plus for 5 of the last 7 years. So I mean, they're clearly one of the best programs in the country that isn't considered an elite, basically. And they started 0-5 or whatever in 2020. Sounded like they had a particular number of issues when it came to getting the students the support they needed in turn, when everything was briefly canceled, and then getting everybody back to campus. All those things. It seemed like they started from behind a little bit in that regard. They lost some close games in there as well. They basically fell to 28th that year in SP Plus, and then they were 24th in 2021 while going 7-6. I do think, it's a good sign for Franklin overall, just in that, he goes 11-11 over 2 years, but there's no hot seat talk. The recruiting doesn't fall off at all. In fact, it gets better. It sounded like they were a little bit slow starting from an NIL perspective, and then they caught up and had, when you're looking at this sophomore class that they're going to be introducing this year, they'll probably be good. They'll probably be solid with that class this year, and then spectacular next year, especially when you're looking at Aller and Nick Singleton and Katron Allen at running back. You have a couple very, very high profile redshirt freshmen in the receiving corps. Caden Saunders being one of them. And then on defense, Abdul Carter would have been the best freshman on just about any team in the country. And he was like third best behind the running backs last year. He's a very, very good linebacker. So that he comes off of 2 11-11 seasons, then signs what might end up being his most impactful freshman class ever, along with hiring Manny Diaz, who was obviously a very good defensive coordinator to replace Brent Pry, who went to Virginia Tech. The fact that they never kind of wavered from the path, even while the results were kind of stuttering there for a minute. I think that's a very, very good sign. Last year they were suddenly right back to where they were from 2016 and 19. And so, yeah, I think they're in very good shape. It's just, two of your two biggest rivals in the conference right now are in even better shape. And we'll see if you can close that gap. Obviously that, whether it should or not, that always ends up when your rivals are doing better than you. It colors, just ask Ryan Day. It colors the perception of you, whether it should or not.
Absolutely. And we'll get back to Ryan Day in a little bit. But first, I want to ask you about what Deion Sanders is doing at Colorado. You talked about the 50 transfers.
I think it's like 52 now, actually. 51 or 52.
52 now. Just a complete revamping of the roster. And I think a lot of that happened after spring practice when he got a chance to look at some of these players and he said, no, thank you. I don't know. So you mentioned what your numbers said. I think you have them at 103rd, which is a significant upgrade, maybe outside of your numbers.
Upgrade, and clearly they're going to be better than that anyway. Yeah.
Okay. So you think they'd be better than that?
Better than that. Yeah. Not necessarily good, but better than that. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So, why do you think that? Just because of when you look in depth at the roster and the guys that they're bringing in, you see improvement.
Yeah. I think first of all, it should be said, I think a lot of this work was unnecessary. You look at a lot of the guys who were basically forced out, they ended up transferring to programs that have been much, much better than Colorado in recent years. I think that says something right there. They're not going to Georgia or anything, but just because you had a terrible team doesn't mean every single member of that two deep was terrible. There's still a lot of D1 athletes here. Jordan Tyson, the receiver, was good and injured, but he was solid. There were some on defense, especially. Like, I think, he clearly wanted a complete and total blood transfusion here. And I think it was a lot of unnecessary work because a lot of the guys he brought in for the transfer portal weren't any better than the guys he got rid of. It was just, it's his guys now. And so I do think there was a lot of redundancy here in the guys he got rid of, but I do think there are still some, Shedeur Sanders is a clear upgrade, even though we don't completely know how good he's going to be. Obviously, it's a major jump in competition, especially with, playing at TCU and at Oregon in the first month of the season. And then coming home to play USC actually, and you got Nebraska in there as well. Like, it's going to be tough, but the quarterbacks were genuinely terrible last year. And Shedeur Sanders is going to be an upgrade from that. Maybe they got an upgrade in the skill core. I like the two USF transfers, Xavier Weaver and Jimmy Horn Jr. But I mean, the skill core did have Jordan Tyson. It had a couple of guys who were at least almost as good. So I can't guarantee there's going to be an upgrade there. I think they're going to be incredibly thin on the offensive line. And basically both lines in general, or at quarterback, if they have any injuries in any of those spots, like, things fall apart very, very quickly. But no, I mean, there's no question that the talent level itself is better than it was last year, and therefore they will be a better team. I assume, I have them 103rd. I assume we're talking more like a 60 to 80 kind of, or maybe 50 to 80 kind of range, depending on injuries and how lucky they get in that regard. But their schedule's brutal. And we don't really know how Deion Sanders handles adversity as a head coach. We know he can get a little defensive in the media, but they struggled in that spring 2021 COVID season when he first got there, and all the coaches kind of were in the SWAC were kind of lining up to take some swings at that program, and they didn't do very well. But the last 2 years, they've been just so much more talented than everybody else that they were able to win a ton of games. And he's going to recruit well. They're going to have a pair of the best cornerbacks in the country already. Obviously Travis Hunter coming from Jackson State, but then also he signed Cormani McClain, a 5-star freshman. They're gonna be very good in the secondary there. They just might get obliterated up front. We'll see. Interesting how that goes.
I think it's very interesting that they have this potential to have like one of the best secondaries possibly in the nation with the high level of these recruits, and one of the starters is not his son.
Right. One of the starters could be his son. But yeah, like that's but no, that's a clear area where they've upgraded. I hate this. I hate. We can always kind of run into trouble when we start talking about what about the athletes themselves, because obviously, you got the NCAA begging Congress to help them keep athletes from making money again, basically, or as much, or, control things a little bit more. All these, we all have different ideas of what, protecting the athletes means or whatever, but we tell these guys, your coach might change. So you need to, you got to pick the school, not the coach, right? You got to, and the school just basically kicked out a bunch of guys, 50 plus guys, almost the entire roster. A lot of those guys wanted to stick around and help rebuild the program, and they were told no. And that just sucks, especially when a lot of their replacements weren't any better than they were. A lot of guys, like Boulder's an amazing college town, and Colorado's a good university, and a bunch of guys just got told, you suck too much to play here. And not like the 3 or 4, we're used to every team in the country basically kind of quietly kicking off 3 or 4 guys because they have 89 scholarships. They got to get down to 85, but we haven't seen somebody kick the entire team off before. And that I'm never going to like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's never good. You probably like that a little bit less than some of the things we're going to talk about with realignment a little bit later.
I don't like that either, but that's fine. Yeah.
But I'm really looking forward to following Colorado, and we'll see.
Yeah, as an experiment, as a thought experiment, it is absolutely fascinating. I can't tell how this is going to go.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of opportunity for some good long form writing every year about how this program is going. Bill, let's jump back to the Big Ten East a little bit. We have Michigan, and that brings back starter and JJ McCarthy, but there's kind of the idea that they got lucky with big plays last year down in Columbus. Is that reproducible? And then we have an Ohio State team that looks pretty good everywhere except for the quarterback position, and losing the number 2 pick in the NFL draft. So, how do you see Michigan and Ohio State playing out this year?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is. In terms of bird in hand, Michigan has the clear edge. We don't completely know how good JJ McCarthy is or will be. I almost threw a McCaffrey in there. But we know he's at least good. Like at worst, he's good. He didn't necessarily handle kind of long downs and distances very well last year. And we know that, you look at some of I was playing with like contested catch data. And let me pull that up real fast. Basically, let's see. So Sports Info Solutions kind of designates passes as like open or contested. And in terms of the percentage of contested passes that McCarthy threw to his receivers, it was kind of dead on the national average. About 27% were deemed quote unquote contested by SIS. He had a 30% completion rate in those passes that ranked 92nd in the country, and averaged only 3.9 yards per dropbacks when throwing contested passes, which was 113th in the country. Whether that was McCarthy throwing, iffy balls, whether that was, his receivers, obviously Ronnie Bell's gone, but, Cornelius Johnson, Roman Wilson, those guys, if they were just not good enough at catching those balls, then that's not necessarily going to improve this year. And that could hold them back a little bit. I do think, their third down numbers were fine. Their passing downs numbers were fine. They weren't terrible, but they weren't as good as, they were very good at staying on schedule. And when they were off schedule, they weren't quite as good as other really good teams catching up. So that's going to be kind of a major issue. Sometimes you just need passing downs or playmaker down. Somebody needs to step up and make a play. And that didn't always happen. Because once you can't rely on those two amazing running backs, then things got a little dicier. Now, like you said, at the end of the year, they had a big play issue all year, and then suddenly they're ripping off 75-yard gains left and right against Ohio State, and then big plays weren't an issue against TCU either. But big plays were an issue in a different kind of way against TCU. But was that random? Was that a sign that everything kind of clicked for them at the end of the year? Like, we never really know. That's such a small sample to try to figure that one out. So
for sure. I mean, I think that data on the contested balls is fascinating. I put that all on the receivers. I don't think the receivers are very good.
I think that's probably, I don't trust McCarthy. I don't think he's like a top 5 quarterback. I trust McCarthy, but I don't trust him as a top 5 quarterback. But no, I think I think the receivers are clearly the bigger question mark of the two there.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I think McCarthy has the potential to be top 10-ish in the nation type quarterback, but he needs to make some improvements. I don't think he has a ton of help at wide receiver, but maybe that's changed over the offseason. So
yeah, we know they can make big plays. Roman Wilson's crazy fast. Like, we know the potential there, but again, like, you're going to occasionally go up against crazy fast defenders too, and you need to make a nice one-on-one play, and they didn't necessarily do a lot of that.
Right, for sure. So how about Ohio State breaking in a new quarterback?
Yeah, my general theory about spring practice reports is ignore everything. Basically, just track, who ended the year, who finished spring on the number 1 on the depth chart, and who got hurt. That's basically all I try to get from spring ball, because we always end up falling in love with spring stars who never become fall stars, and it is so it's more hype than anything useful. More noise than signal, we should say, since this is, an analytics podcast. But I think I kind of wavered because both Ohio State and Alabama had pretty mediocre headlines in the quarterback department. Both of these schools get complete and total benefit of the doubt, especially Ohio State, honestly. When's the last time they had a bad quarterback?
Yeah.
But the fact that, Devin Brown missed spring, Kyle McCord was by all accounts, pretty mediocre. Pretty inconsistent. That was a little bit scary, but I'm gonna ignore that and I'm going to look at the track records here and assume, I mean, McCord was one of the best recruits in the country. Devin Brown was one of the best recruits in the country. I think the odds are still very much in favor of them having good quarterback play, even if it, CJ Stroud, his ability to to throw accurate balls and hit guys in stride was absolutely incredible. And it led to so many little, 8-yard hook routes turning into 60-yard gains, especially with Smith and Jigba the year before last. Maybe they don't hit that standard. Maybe the accuracy goes down a little bit, but they can also counter that by having by far the best receiving core in the country. And I'm not going to, I can talk myself into worrying about Ohio State, but I'm not gonna. I think they're going to be fine offensively. I think they'll be better defensively, even if they're not amazing. And I said they were 13th earlier in defensive SP+. That's their projection for this year. They were 23rd last year. So they improved last year. I think they'll improve further this year, and I think they'll be one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the country again.
Absolutely. I find it hilarious that people think Ryan Day should be on the hot seat, especially me.
I know why, and it's also stupid. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I live here in Ann Arbor. I identify as a Michigan fan, and I had my doubts about Day when he first got there, with no proven track record as a head coach. And yeah, they've had their problems on the defensive side of the ball, but the man's a good head football coach. Like, you want to get rid of him, you're going to reap the consequences.
Right. He might not be an elite football coach. You don't have to be an elite football coach at Ohio State. He hasn't really mastered the art of hiring good defensive coordinators yet. Maybe he did on this one, but we don't know for sure yet.
He hired Don Brown, as far as I'm concerned, and that most of the time works out.
And so, yeah, I mean, I also don't like his conservatism in general. Like, I think he really clammed up. I know they called a fake punt that didn't end up happening against Michigan on like 4th and 2 or something like that. And every time I bring up a pretty mediocre 4th down go rate, somebody will push back and say, well, he called that and you're stupid or whatever. But even then, like Twitter. 4th and 2 from around midfield, you have the best receivers in the country and the most accurate quarterback in the country. Maybe that's the way to go on 4th and 2 instead of relying on a good look in a fake punt. But last year, I mean, they went for it 17 times, which was 108th in the country, which when you have a very efficient offense, maybe you don't face as many, but their go rate on 4th down overall was 19.5%. That ranked 94th. Their go rate in opposing field position was only 27%, which ranked 118th. They just and their conversion rate was 71%, which was 7th. Like, they could have. He's kind of like Lincoln Riley in that we think of really good offensive coaches as aggressive guys, but not necessarily. They're just good offensive coaches. They're also very conservative in their tendencies, and I think that holds Ohio State back a little bit. I'm not going to worry about it because Ohio State has more talent than all but about 2 teams in the country, and they're going to be very good.
Absolutely. Bill, how about a surprise team for you in the 2023 college football season?
Are we talking about Big Ten East or are we talking about in general?
In general. We've had enough Big Ten East talk. Probably should go outside of that.
Also, how are you going to come up with a surprise in the Big Ten East? I mean, I guess Maryland or Michigan State could turn into like top 25 teams, but they're still not going to be. They're not going to win the East. Let's see. Overall, I'm struggling. Like, I think maybe Tennessee is going to be better than expected, but I don't think anybody will really be surprised by that. I think everybody understands, or a lot of people understand, they could be very good. As you know, obviously putting all your eggs into saying Joe Milton's going to really put the pieces together this time. Like, we need to see that before we completely believe it. But I think their odds are pretty good. Josh Heupel's offense is just so well tuned at this point. That I think he's going to have a very good chance of doing good things, or he might take too many sacks again and get benched for that 5-star freshman by the end of September. But even then I think their offense is going to be good. And they're going to be a pretty scary test for Georgia at the end of the year. So I don't know I don't think that qualifies as a surprise though.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, right? Because you have them 6th in SP+, and that seems high for me, right? So, is the idea the surprise would be that they legitimately challenge Georgia for the East?
Well, I mean, getting Georgia at home is going to help them, but I mean, I think like they're still. I have them projected as like 35% win probability against Alabama and 42% against Georgia. I mean, you think of it like all they have to do if they only lose to Alabama, they head into November 18th against Georgia with everything on the table, right? Like if they can pull one certain upset, like overachieve projections by one single touchdown in that game, then suddenly they're probably SEC East champions and playoff contenders. I think the best way to describe them sixth, let's put it this way. Last year, they finished fifth. They were first in offense and 21st on defense. This year, they're projected to slide to third on offense and to 31st on defense. So they are projected to be worse than last year, but the fact that they were able to get up to that level on defense was a very good sign because, like USC, they don't have to have a top 5 defense here. And you just Josh Heupel, I just trust Josh Heupel at this point. I know the scary part of putting your eggs into the Joe Milton basket, and Michigan fans do too. But I think he gets a third chance, and almost nobody gets a third chance in college football.
Right.
And I think the odds are in his favor here, even though I know the potential downside of saying that.
For sure. I mean, so I remember Joe Milton headed into the 2020 season at Michigan as the starter, and he wasn't good, but he also he had a tip pass against Wisconsin that went for a pick, and I'm not sure he ever made it on the field again after that. Like there was some bad stuff that happened to him.
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly make the case that, especially when the season kind of went south on Harbaugh anyway. Yeah, like I'm looking up at stats. Like we kind of maybe overreacted to the first game. He didn't have to do much against Minnesota, but he torched Minnesota.
He was good in that game.
And Michigan, blew Minnesota out. But then, the next week he was pretty bland against Michigan State, and they lose by 3. He was wholly meaty. Well, he had a couple picks. He had a couple big plays against Indiana and a couple picks, and they lost that game. And maybe, I think giving up 38 points to Indiana is probably the big crime of that game.
Right.
But he wasn't good enough in that game. And then, he comes in, throws 2 picks against Wisconsin, and that's pretty much it. He played a little bit against Rutgers. And then he was 1 for 3 against Penn State, and he transferred. You could say that, especially when that season was lost, that stick with Milton because he clearly has the most seductive arm in college football. He has seduced Jim Harbaugh and Josh Heupel with his arm because even Heupel starts him to start 2021 and then figures out, oh crap, right, he's not that good yet. He takes too many. I think his biggest issue is he's very patient. It's one of those, he's either patient or slow, right? Like he processes things not quite, he trusts himself to make a play before he gets hit, basically, and he gets hit a lot because of it. And maybe that becomes an issue again at Tennessee. But that system, I think he's been in that system 2 years. It's very fast moving. He has a lot of quick and easy reads that and Josh Heupel slot receivers. Going back to when he was offensive coordinator at Missouri, Josh Heupel slot receivers average like 24 yards per catch and are the single most just slam dunk entity. Jalen Hyatt won the Biletnikoff as a slot receiver last year. Squirrel White's going to have a humongous year this year as a slot receiver in that system. And it's probably, I think they're probably going to, it's going to work out for him this time, even if it, though it might not, I guess.
No, I like I like the idea of it working out for Joe Milton. It is very interesting to hear you talk back to that Indiana Michigan game because I'm pretty sure that's when Michael Penix was there, right? And they kind of had 2 years where they were good when mostly when Penix was there, and then reading through your previews, it doesn't look good for that program and Tom Allen.
No, it all felt Penix went 30 for 50 for 342 against Michigan in that game. Probably a bigger issue than Milton's play. But no, I mean, Indiana's in horrific shape. I mean, I will say, like, Tom Allen, he's not standing pat. Like, he's loading up on transfers, and he's made new coordinator hires and all this stuff. He's trying really, really hard to get them back on the right path, but it's hard to – I think they'll be better this year, but it's hard to say they're going to be good, yeah.
All right, Bill, let's move on. Let's maybe talk a little bit about the Heisman Trophy. Caleb Williams is coming back. He won it last year. He will again be good. Obviously, no one's won it twice in a row in quite a while. Maybe give us your thoughts on the Heisman and maybe some players that we can expect to challenge for the award.
Well, it is funny. Guys don't repeat as Heisman winners. That's kind of a nice standby. Like it hasn't happened since Griffin in the 70s, and Tim Tebow was still awesome, but still didn't repeat. So you automatically kind of look at who else is out there. It's Caleb Williams is in great shape, though. If you just think about it from the perspective of his defense is probably going to improve quite a bit. So if he just does exactly the same thing, USC is going to be very, very successful. They were successful last year with a horrible defense, but they have a chance to put themselves into contention if the defense gets to top 40-ish standards. And sadly, because of the way things work, that will help Williams' odds of repeating as Heisman winner, even though it's happening when he's not on the field. But I think we know that. Of course, he's the favorite. He won it last year, and he comes back. That's fine, even if guys don't repeat. But if you think of things in terms of like who's the number one other contender, I have no freaking idea whatsoever. I mean, okay. There could be. The way I feel. I mean, there could be. I'm looking at, I think, the relatively updated odds here, and there are so many guys between plus 1,000 and plus 2,000. And it really just depends on your flavor. If you want another Pac-12 quarterback, you've got Penix, you've got Bo Nix, you've got, I don't think Cam Rising is really a Heisman guy, but he's going to be very good. Obviously, Drake May, I think we've probably gone out a little too far over our skis with Drake May. I don't think he's going to be spectacular this year, although maybe. And then, Jaden Daniels, he at LSU, they're going to win a lot of games, and he's super, like, he runs himself into trouble too sometimes, but LSU had just about the most efficient offense in the country last year. And as I say, any offense that Jaden Daniels is quarterback for becomes a Jaden Daniels offense based around efficiency and scrambling and all those things. But he's going to be good, and they're going to be good. Jordan Travis at FSU, if you think they really do have top 5 potential, he can stay healthy. He gets hit a lot too. He's going to be really interesting. I mean, there are so many guys who could be the number 2 favorite, and it really just depends on what you're looking for, I guess. So Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe, right. They don't get quite as good quarterback play. He still goes for 2,000 yards or something, and therefore he gets ahead of, whoever the quarterback ends up being, I guess probably McCord. Sam Hartman, Joe Milton, Drew Aller, like most of the time, Heisman, we've seen a lot of sophomore breakouts making Heisman runs. Maybe Milton or Aller becomes the guy. So it's funny. It's a pretty uninteresting race when we have a clear favorite, and it's a super interesting race because we have no clear number 2.
Right. Exactly. Any one of those guys that you have talked about that you like more than the others?
If we're talking about betting odds, if you can get Aller or Milton in the plus 22, 2,500 range, something like that, I think that's the best bet, because either one of them could implode entirely. But those are great odds. Those are spectacular odds for considering what their upside is, especially Milton with just the offense that he's working in. So it is funny. I keep saying I'm betting on Milton here, even though I know the downside of doing so. It's just, you're going to get pretty good odds for betting on him. And I would say that's the way to go. I do think, Quinn Ewers is up there as well. Quinn Ewers is interesting in that, like, when I was playing with the numbers on him, well, first of all, the odds aren't going to be, that's going to be more like plus 800 or plus 1,000. And I don't think that's good enough. But Ewers is fascinating from the perspective of, like, first 3 quarters and first and second downs. He was a good quarterback last year. 3rd down and 4th down and 4th quarter, he was horrific last year. An absolute nightmare, like 87th in QBR or something like that in those situations. Is that a thing, or was that just bad luck and small samples, and he'll probably just by nature improve in those situations? Therefore, Texas will win 10 and 11 games or in a Big 12 title, and he'll be on the list. It's interesting. I don't know what to think about that kind of small sample situation right there, but he was so bad in all of those situations, and therefore Texas was bad in close games. And I don't know what to make of that exactly.
I think the important part about what you said, though, is the strategy, right? We don't know who's going to win this Heisman, so why not pick some high variance guys? You talked about how Joe Milton might not even have the job come game 5, game 6. That's fine, because we understand his upside. We understand how good the team is. Quinn Ewers might not have the job by game 5. when you have Arch Manning sitting behind him.
As anybody who listens to your podcast, I assume, knows, like, yeah, you're not betting on what you think will happen. It's just all about the odds of what will happen. And I do think that looking at this list, like Carson Beck at Georgia, you can probably get him in or Kyle McCord, you can probably get him in that plus 2,000 range. And he's the Ohio State quarterback. Ohio State quarterbacks tend to do pretty well in the Heisman race. So it's a fun list in that regard. Alabama's quarterback, you could probably get better odds on an Alabama quarterback right now than since 2015.
You got to figure out who's going to start, though.
Well, right. Yeah, that is probably. And it does sound like Tyler Buchner might have a better chance than maybe people thought. And that's kind of scary just because you're Alabama and you're picking, you might start a guy who wasn't looking at starting at Notre Dame. And that's just not the situation Nick Saban's usually in. Even if his upside still seems to be pretty impressive. He was all over the place in that South Carolina bowl game, and it was fun, and he had made a lot of great plays. So maybe that ends up fine, but yeah, it is a little dicey in that regard.
Let's talk about Alabama really quick, because you mentioned this problem at the quarterback position. It's been interesting to me because before last season, they just had a slew of first-round talent at the wide receiver position, and then all of a sudden last year they're bringing in a bunch of transfers to fill those spots. So what's going on down there? Oh, and then we see these tweets with Nick Saban smiling after a press conference, right? Like
Nick Saban doesn't smile. Yeah,
I saw the picture, Bill. Must be true. Must be true. So what's going on down there?
Yeah, it is. It's Alabama problems. It's first world problems, but it does feel
royalty
like
problems.
Right. Yeah. It is. There are more questions more legitimate questions about Alabama this year than there have been since 2008, or at least since 2015 in that range for the offense. And it is funny. I've been saying, they've got more quarterback questions right now than they have since 2015. Well, they won the title in 2015. So again, royalty here, but losing both coordinators again. And I mean, Tommy Rees, he's definitely a solid offensive coordinator, but he's got a very high bar to clear here. And so that was kind of an interesting hire to me. Kevin Steele coming back to run the defense as much as anybody besides Saban runs the defense. I think it's telling just that they're projected fourth. They haven't been projected fourth since I think 2008. Wow. And the last time they had quarterback questions like this, they had the best defense in the country, and they don't anymore. I mean, they have a top 10 defense, but they don't have a top 2 defense. So it is. You start to just go position by position, or you just look at all the 4 and 5 stars they got on the roster. You realize their upside's still spectacular, but their offensive line really kind of fell off last year, and then it lost a couple of all-conference guys. The receiving core did fall off last year, even if it was still solid. He didn't bring in any transfers this year, so they're still riding with Ja'Cory Brooks and Jermaine Burton and, a couple of young 5 stars who will pop up, I'm sure. But, there's nothing really proven there. Burton and Brooks are obviously solid, but they're not the guys they replaced. And so, Jahmyr Gibbs is gone. Jace McClellan could be really good, but among other things, he's not the pass catcher, or he doesn't have quite the potential in that regard, even though he had some nice receptions, I think. So, this is the lowest floor they've had in a while.
Right.
Even if the ceiling's still as high as anybody's. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like Michigan ceiling is like their floor, right?
Right.
I mean, that's kind of so awesome. So, Bill, I wrote some questions for you for this podcast last week, and I actually, I started this last Thursday, and I did not have anything about realignment because I wanted to talk about football. But then over the weekend, we got the Pac-4. Yep. And my Stanford Cardinal is completely screwed. But just wanted to get your thoughts on this entire situation.
And I published some thoughts at ESPN. You can read. They went up yesterday. You can read all that, obviously. But it was this last week. Realignment. I'm struggling here. I just wrote 4,000 words about this, and I'm struggling.
But that's the that's. I think that's why you could obviously go read your thoughts, and I did, but I think this gives a sense for what's underlying those thoughts, right, and the emotions behind it.
this last week kind of dragged me down more than anything in college football has in a while. And college football always kind of offers you some reason to be kind of down about it. And I mean, I think it's a couple things. It's not necessarily, it's nothing new. Oh wow, rivalries died. Well, Missouri Kansas died in like 2011. That's, Texas and A&M died, and now it's back. We've brought some back with the SEC moves that are happening next year. But we also killed Bedlam in the process. Like, killing rivalries is nothing new here. But the extreme version of this, the fact that we've now broken, the Big Ten has broken geography with its latest set of moves, and the fact that Oregon's not going to be playing Oregon State, but we'll be playing Rutgers, and volleyball teams having to go all the way across the country. Like this was such a stretch, this round of moves, and with less broadcaster upside. I mean, everybody's always going to say, "Oh, ESPN and Fox run the show," and this is all done because of what the television, what broadcasters want. But broadcasters only get so much out of this last round of moves. We killed the conference, and I mean, I guess Fox is going to benefit in terms of inventory, having Oregon and Washington. Those are good football programs, but they're not going to benefit like they did bringing in USC and UCLA, or like, obviously OU and Texas moving to within the purview of the SEC network. So like nobody's benefiting from this round of moves like they have from other rounds of moves, and we're doing it anyway. And that just kind of sucks.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was just thinking, I mean, in some sense, can we think of this as like, how did the Pac-12 survive this long? Right. I mean, we know they've been losing the arms race for a decade basically since Larry Scott failed to get Oklahoma and Texas to join the Pac-16, and their media deals got worse and worse. And they were falling behind the Big Ten and the SEC.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I've always said about the Pac-12 in general, was once they couldn't land OU in Texas, however that played out, Texas got cold feet. And, right after the fact, I know Larry Scott and everybody was like, well, we decided not to expand anymore. Like, pretty sure that was because they said no. But also, I'm sure, Pac-12 presidents were kind of their own worst enemy a lot. And, basically having the bar a little too high as far as, we don't want to be associated with Oklahoma State. That the arrogance involved in some of those schools, not going to mention any specific school that, somebody might have attended, but just the arrogance of the Pac-12 in general, I think did hold them back in specific moments. And also just geography. Once they didn't land OU in Texas, there was no other big fish they could land, because everybody else was, granted, now we've broken geography, but Florida State wasn't going to join the Pac-12. And so, they were just stuck. Once television revenue or media rights revenue mattered so much, and the Big Ten and SEC contracts especially got so much bigger than everybody else's, that everybody had to figure out their way into the Big Ten and SEC. There was no keeping USC and UCLA, and there was no keeping anybody if the Big Ten decided they wanted those schools. And so this was kind of preordained in a way. And but it also sucks. And, the fact that, what was it, 2017 or 18 when I did that SB Nation camp, the college football commissioner campaign.
Absolutely.
Piece. So I've been complaining about like a lack of centralized leadership in this sport for a very long time, but it hit me that like in 2020, when all the power conferences did their own thing, and it was just an embarrassing disaster.
Right.
The fact that happened and we still didn't end up with any sort of centralized leadership. No, I mean, not that we could have, like the structure doesn't really provide it, but we didn't even pursue it. We didn't do anything, and nothing happened to change anything. This was always going to be preordained, and everything else that's going to come in the future feels preordained too. The stuff that nobody asks for, the stuff that nobody wants, a super league where Ohio State's not, in Alabama's conference, but not Iowa's, however this plays out, that feels like that we're just charging. Nobody wants it, and we're charging toward it anyway. And that's really stupid, and it's going to do some damage. Maybe everybody keeps watching, but the idea of a super league thing here, and the fact that it's always driven by this idea of like, it's all about, TV and ratings and all that. Well, USC Florida in the college football playoff or in a big bowl or a big like early September non-conference game, that would get great ratings. But USC versus Florida in mid-October when both teams are like 2-4 isn't going to get great TV ratings just because they're USC and Florida. And so we're just charging towards our own demise here to some degree. And it really sucks. And there's nobody who can steer us out of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the only thing that was kind of going to steer us out of it was Apple or Google trying to create a super league, right? Like getting the SEC, getting the Big Ten on board, but that didn't happen.
And we almost kind of need like the soccer moment of Super League that they've been talking about for 20 years finally happens, and everybody rebels against it, and the English clubs get scared and bail, and everything falls apart. It feels like that's the only thing that's going to help now is that somebody actually tries it and it fails, because otherwise it's just going to slowly succeed.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, in some sense we're there, right? With Big Ten and SEC.
I don't know that college football fans are going to rebel like soccer fans did.
Well, they might.
I hope they do, but I'm not 100% sure that they will, because we've been rooting for spreadsheets and money for the last 15 years. Hooray, we got a bid and we're going to make more money than our rivals. We won't play them anymore, but we're making more money. And that's apparently what matters now. That's really, if the fans aren't going to rebel against it, nobody else is going to.
Right. I think my other thought on this is that, well, at least the Saudi money hasn't come in and taken over the sport.
Well, give Florida State a chance. That was the underlying, that was the kind of, with everything else going on, Florida State, announcing they wanted to leave a conference even though they had nowhere to go. That was certainly interesting. But then they also started, like, they're trying to get involved with JP Morgan and private equity and all that. And that's, as my friend and former coworker, Matt Brown, in his newsletter this morning said, like, if Florida State can do it, like Ohio State can do it too. And lots and lots of other schools can do it. And that's when you completely lose control of the sport at that point. And that's how you get money from overseas involved as well. Once you start getting into private equity.
For sure. If you're like a Saudi money fund, like, why wouldn't you take the money that you're offering a single soccer player, which is clearly nothing to them, split it 12 ways and give $20 million to every MAC school a year?
I think as far as MAC schools, I don't know if they'd see the benefit in that, but there are so many brands in this sport that they could latch onto. Yeah. I mean, all they need is a way in the door, and we haven't provided them a way in the door yet, but that doesn't mean we won't. But
there is a way in the door. You just give money to schools. Like,
well,
that's how this has always worked. Right. And why? I mean, if I ran a Saudi fund, I would give $20 million to every MAC school, because then all of a sudden you essentially own that school and their athletic department, and those programs get better and long-term investment. And
I mean, Texas A&M already has a branch. Was it, now I'm blanking, was it Saudi Arabia or somewhere in the Middle East? They already have a branch at a country with a lot of oil money. So, oh my
gosh. Well, okay.
There you go.
So we'll look back at this podcast in a couple years, and I will shoot myself in the head, and and we'll go from there.
Yeah. No, it's hard. Last week was hard. Like, I mean, because the games are so entertaining, and because things have happened slowly enough through the years. I mean, we've had super conferences, 12-team super conferences for 30 years now. That was supposed to be the downfall of the sport, and 30 years later, it's changed, but not. A lot's changed in 30 years, but we don't have the Super League yet. We don't have Alabama and Ohio State in the same conference yet. And therefore, because it hasn't happened yet, A, you can get kind of lulled to sleep a little bit, and B, it also doesn't have to ever happen if we want to steer out of it. But then you have a week like last week and you realize, we're still very much on that path, and you kind of have to reckon with it a little bit, and that sucks.
It does. But what doesn't suck is that you also write about soccer. I don't know how you find time to do college football and the amazing coverage that you do for soccer as well. We got lots going on. Women's World Cup, Premier League starts this weekend, and more importantly, the Bundesliga starts next weekend.
That's right. The league, yes.
Just your general thoughts. I know you're working on probably a bajillion articles, but any thoughts on the upcoming soccer season before I let you go?
Yeah, Ryan O'Hanlon and I have a piece coming out this week, kind of a dual preview of the Premier League, at least. And then I'll have some Bundesliga stuff coming around as well here. Yeah. Speaking of kind of depressing, it was kind of funny. I had this picture emerging last year where every Premier League team wrote obnoxiously big checks and acquired 20 new players and so on and so forth, and like two of them got better. And it was kind of, as a fan of the Bundesliga, as a fan of just having not parity, we've never had parity in any of these sports, either of these sports, but just having an opportunity, a pathway for success for other clubs that are really well run. Like, I kind of liked that the Premier League was spending so much, because if you're a well-run club in other countries, suddenly you've got a easy way to make about $60 million a year in transfer fees, desperate transfer fees. Plus, you can pull an RB Leipzig and sell Timo Werner to Chelsea and then get him back 2 years later when they've signed 138 other attackers in the process. You can get them at a discount. So it was kind of funny. Like, there's this way for all these other leagues to almost improve because of the Premier League's money.
Sure.
And then Saudi Arabia comes in around and bails Chelsea out of every single bad contract they have. And gives them now that means they get to go sign, write more checks, and I guess so maybe that just furthers everything. But the fact that the biggest clubs in around Europe, but especially in England, now have they have a new pathway to revenue that they didn't have before.
Right.
That kind of sucks too. But
right.
All that said, I think heading into this year, the most interesting thing, and Ryan O'Hanlon, we did a little YouTube thing that'll also go up with the written piece.
Awesome.
Ryan had a really good point in that the most single interesting question of the year is, what about last season was real? Okay. Not only because of the checks being written by the Premier League, but also just because of the fact that we paused the season in the middle of it to have a World Cup. And then we just resumed the season right after that.
Right.
Like the Bundesliga and Serie A, those leagues still took some weeks off or whatever, but the Premier League just jumped right back in as soon as the tournament ended. And you had this, we managed to figure out a way to increase the wear and tear that was already kind of ravaging. Now, apparently the Premier League has figured out another way to increase wear and tear by adding like an extra 10 minutes that nobody asked for to the end of matches.
Wait, what?
By applying, the FIFA standards. How suddenly we had like 12 minutes of stoppage time at the end of every World Cup match last year.
Right.
England's doing that too. In the Community Shield, like Arsenal scored in like the 11th minute of stoppage time or something to tie Manchester City.
Wait, that extra time is supposed to be because people were hurt during the second half, right? So what is the rule? Stoppage
time. So basically, it's more strict stoppage time. Like refs, after goals are scored, they don't necessarily stop the clock immediately after that. And,
right.
Teams are like, it's been, time wasting has been a thing for a long time. Especially the amount of time it takes you to do a throw in and whatnot. But there was a really games in a 90-minute game on average, like 54, 55 minutes of that the ball is actually in play. And they're now going to increase that to like 60, 65 minutes. And again, nobody asked for that. And then you just basically added 5 or 10 minutes of extreme effort to every single game that these stars play. And we're getting a lot of stuff that in both of these sports, we're getting a lot of stuff we didn't ask for. And it's not going to, I don't know why. Like, among other things, one of the single best things about soccer is, it's going to end between an hour 50 and an hour 55 minutes.
Right.
And now they could go like 2 hours, 10 minutes or 2 hours, 5. And like, that's Rafael
Tell
Varane.
That to a college football fan. 2 hours and 10 minutes, man.
Well, that's when you're a college football fan. An hour 50 is just amazing. And that's going to go away too. Rafael Varane and a bunch of players have been tweeting about it, basically saying like, this sucks. I guess they're going to be a little more stringent about yellow cards and red cards. And then also we're going to add 5 to 10 minutes to the end of every game. So we're going to put more strain on you, and we're going to ask you to be less emotional about it.
Wow. Okay. So
that's fun. That's awesome. Yeah. As far as the season as a whole, though, like there are a lot of interesting things going on. Like Arsenal's moves. Now, Gvardiol finally being official for Manchester City certainly is a nice piece there. But losing Gundogan and Mahrez, two of your steadiest guys, and not really replace, not replacing Mahrez at least. They obviously still have talent, but they're not going to. They're not more talented than they were last year. Arsenal might be a lot more talented than they were last year. Did they just close the gap? I don't think they did, but that's going to be really something interesting to watch after basically every Arsenal player improved by 10% last year, and they suddenly became a really good team. They weren't as good as City, but how close have they gotten now? That's going to be really interesting to me. Bayern in Bundesliga, they were the reason Borussia Dortmund wasn't any better last year than they were the year before, but Bayern was so much worse that they almost lost their title. And now they're putting all their desperate eggs into the Harry Kane basket and dealing with like the hardest person to negotiate with in the sport.
Do you think that's going to happen?
I can't. I guess. I lean yes, but Daniel Levy is willing to take forever and eventually cut off his nose to spite his face in negotiation. And you've basically declared like this is our one move that we want to make now. We're not going to leave ourselves enough time to get anybody else before the season starts. We're going all in on Harry Kane, and we're going to deal with a guy we can't really who everybody hates negotiating with. Bayern has become desperate over the last year when they didn't get Erling Haaland, when they weren't able to just take the best other players in the Bundesliga to make their own roster better. They have gotten desperate and openly desperate and fire a coach in April desperate. That's a new world for the Bundesliga. If they don't get Kane, then I really like Dortmund this year. I think they could compete. I'm not going to talk myself into Leverkusen again. I've done that before and it never works out, but I love the moves that Bayer Leverkusen made this offseason. It could be interesting if Bayern does not get Kane.
But I don't know. I feel like, and my numbers suggested from last year that Bayern
were unlucky.
Well, yes, and they were just significantly better than everyone else in the Bundesliga.
Yeah.
And they did go out and get Rafael Guerrero from Dortmund, who is probably their best player. No, it's not their best. Well,
no, he's good. He's good. I'm not sure he's as good as he was 2 years ago, but he's good.
Well, I feel like that is like the beauty of what happened for Dortmund is that they did not buy Guerrero earlier because he's been a great player for them for a while.
Yeah.
I still think Bayern is really good.
I will say with Dortmund, the XG numbers basically suggested like Bayern should have been better than they were. But Dortmund was also much, much better when they actually had the guys they were supposed to have last year. I will say that. I said at the start, it was more Bayern collapsing than Dortmund improving, but they improved dramatically when Sebastian Haller was actually, when he wasn't fighting cancer, when he was actually in the lineup.
Yep.
When he came back, they were twice the team the second half of the year. And I'm like spring practice. I'm not going to draw anything from friendlies, but the one thing I noticed from watching some of their friendlies, which they were successful against Man United and Chelsea for whatever that's worth, but their demeanor, they're just pissed off this year after everything that happened in last year. They were very, very just business-like in the way they were handling themselves in those friendlies. And I'm trying as hard as possible not to read into that, but it kind of adds to what I was already thinking about them. I think they're going to be very, very, they lost Bellingham, but they're used to that. I think they're going to be very, very solid, and Bayern better have their act together, and the numbers better be right about them from last year. Well, unless they get Kane, in which case they're just going to be way better than everybody else.
Yeah. Well, Bill, I hope you're right about Dortmund. I hope they are crazy good. I hope they challenge Bayern. I don't see it happening. I don't know if I told you this, but like the last day of the season when it looked like Dortmund was absolutely going to win the Bundesliga. I mean, I bet Bayern at plus 500 to win the Bundesliga because I was like, dude, this is like Dortmund's good, but there's no way they should be like 88% to get a win against even a mid-table Bundesliga team like that.
Yeah, Mainz was way too just. That was
sports too random for that.
And Mainz had just taken points off of Bayern.
Right.
I was not feeling certain about that situation at all heading into the final day. And it was kind of unlucky the way things played out, but it was still, that was absolutely in the realm of possibility.
Yeah. So, but anyways, all right. Bill Connelly is high on Dortmund. We shall end there. Bill Connelly, thank you so much for your time. Please let everyone know where they can find all your good work.
Yeah, I just realized I'm on an analytics podcast talking about body language. You're welcome. ESPN _Bill C. While Twitter is still a thing, That is probably the best place to start. There is a link in that bio and any other bio on any other social media I'm on for all the stuff that I write at ESPN. But as for now, I'm still calling it Twitter because you can still get to it from twitter.com. And
it's still twitter.com.
And
so there's a little
X
in the corner.
That's right. ESPN _ Bill C.
How much of your work ends up like behind the paywall at ESPN Plus versus like not?
Football? It's been almost entirely behind the paywall since 2020. But it sounds like they've finally come up with kind of a general strategy for the FC stuff, and I'm probably part of that too. I whatever. I've never aimed to be behind a paywall, but I've always understood that like my stuff is probably meant for a paywall in a number of ways. And so yeah, probably a lot of the soccer stuff will be too. Tennis probably not. So if you like the tennis stuff, yeah, that's free.
Awesome.
You should probably be, everybody should be subscribing to E Plus already anyway. So, free then.
Mostly for your work, I would say. So,
and the offerings, where else are you going to get all the other Sunbelt games?
True. And you can watch every single Bundesliga game.
That's correct.
And La Liga too, I think, right?
Yeah. La Liga and Bundesliga.
Bill, thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Ed Fang, and I'm honored to be the host of the Football Analytics Show podcast. Thank you for listening to that awesome conversation with Bill Connelly. Please go check out all of his work on ESPN. It is a really, really important part of my process for preparing for the college football season. Some of his stuff, as he mentioned, is behind the paywall on ESPN Plus, but I do think it's a great service. I subscribe to it for the multitude of benefits. Just a reminder, you can sign up for my free sports betting email newsletter. Every Saturday, I send out 5 Nugget Saturday. There's usually a bet in there over the weekend. If you're looking for some action on something, please check that out at thepowerrank.com. Also, I talked about the 10-part preview series that will appear in the newsletter. I've decided to also make that available on this podcast, so you'll be able to either listen or read. It's up to you. Decided to make that content. It's content that I'm really proud of, and a lot of it's already been worked on, and I just want to make it as easily as accessible to you as possible. So that will appear both in the newsletter and in this podcast that will start later this month in August. Once again, my name is Ed Fang. Thank you so much for listening to the end of this podcast. I will talk to you again soon.